This morning I'd like to talk about Jesus, the Son of Man. I'm convinced that many of us completely miss the significance behind the term Son of Man when Jesus used that term. I know that I've missed the significance of that for many years. I really actually wondered, why does he keep referring to himself as Son of Man? I thought Son of God would sound so much more powerful and it really seemed to make more of the point that I thought Jesus needed to be making. Why does he keep wanting to remind people he's the Son of Man? And in my studies I have learned, really, it didn't really come together until fairly recently that Son of Man is actually a title of glory for the Son of God. You might say, how can that be a title of glory? Well, I want to show you how I come to that conclusion this morning as we study this topic in preparation for the Lord's Supper. The term Son of Man is used in the Old Testament 107 times. And 93 of those times it is used in the book of Ezekiel to refer to Ezekiel. When it's used of Ezekiel, it's God calling Ezekiel Son of Man to distinguish the fact that God is divine, but Ezekiel, he's a human being. But it was the term for God's prophet. We also see the term used in other passages, like in Psalm 8 and verse 4. What is man that you take thought of him, and the Son of Man that you care for him? There we see that the term Son of Man is parallel to the term man. It's just a poetic way of saying mankind. But there is one Old Testament passage that stands out as being very unique, and the term in which the term Son of Man is found, and that is in Daniel 7. So I invite you to open your Bibles up. Turn your Bibles, please, to Daniel chapter 7. In this chapter, Daniel sees a vision of these four beasts coming up out of the sea, one at a time. The fourth beast represents the kingdom of Rome. And it's this dreadful, terrifying beast. Read with me in verses 9 and 10. Daniel says, I kept looking until thrones were set up, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His vesture was like white snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was ablaze with flames. Its wheels were a burning fire. A river of fire was flowing and coming out from before him. Thousands upon thousands were attending him, and myriads upon myriads were standing before him. The court sat, and the books were opened. Can we see that this is a scene of judgment? The Ancient of Days, Yahweh, is coming, and He is Almighty, He is powerful, He is wise, and He has come with all of this fire. He has come in judgment of that fourth beast and of these other beasts as well, these kingdoms. And the kingdoms would represent, starting with Babylon and then Medo-Persia, then Greece, and then that fourth one is Rome. We read in the second half of verse 11, I kept looking until the beast was slain, meaning that fourth beast, and its body was destroyed and given to the burning fire. And then verse 12, as for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but an extension of life was granted to them for an appointed period of time. And then we get to where I really wanted to focus in this chapter. Verse 13, I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, one like a Son of Man was coming. And he came up to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion, glory, and a kingdom that all the peoples, nations, and men of every language might serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which will not pass away, and his kingdom is one which will not be destroyed. Daniel is describing to us what he saw. And what he saw was one like a human being. He said one like a son of man. He didn't know who it was. We know that it was Jesus Christ in this vision. But all he knew is this looked like a human being, and indeed it was. It was a human being, because it was Jesus. But Jesus is more than a human being. This Son of Man came with the clouds. That is a description that is only in other passages in the Old Testament associated with Yahweh, who comes with the clouds, who sits on the cloud. But here we see this Son of Man coming with the clouds. In other words, this Son of Man is divine, just like the Ancient of Days is. And he is given this dominion. He's given this kingdom, this eternal kingdom. It's a parallel passage to Daniel 2:44, where it is prophesied of that same fourth kingdom of Rome, that in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed. It will crush and put an end to all these other kingdoms, but it will itself endure forever. It's the kingdom that God will bring, and it will be given to this Son of Man. Son of Man is a title of glory. It is a title of deity. It is a title of triumph for the Son of God. And I believe that it is this passage that really gives the meaning to the term Son of Man that Jesus used. I used to think it was because of the book of Ezekiel. And Ezekiel was God's prophet. He was called Son of Man. Jesus was also God's prophet. He's called Son of Man. And maybe there is some significance to that. But I thought that was it. And it still confused me, because Ezekiel was called Son of Man just to mean you're just a human being. But Jesus wasn't just a human being. The term Son of Man is used in the Gospels 81 times. 79 of those 81 times, all but 2, Jesus used that term to refer to himself in the third person. 2 of those times it was spoken of by others in reference to Jesus. So just consider a few of the passages where Jesus used Son of Man that we're very familiar with. One of them is in Matthew chapter 8, when Jesus said, "Foxes have holes and birds of the air have their nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head." Was he simply saying that this human being, this Son of Man, I've got nowhere to lay my head? No, I don't think that's the point. I think what he's saying is, I, the one who will receive an eternal dominion and kingdom, I don't even have anywhere to lay my head here on this earth. Or in Luke 19, when with the story of Zacchaeus, Jesus said, "The Son of Man has come to seek and to save that which was lost." Is he simply saying, this human being, I've come to seek and to save lost people? I don't think he's saying, I, the one who will receive an eternal kingdom, I've come to seek and save the lost to bring into that kingdom. Or in John 8, we were looking at this verse a little bit in my last Lord's Supper sermon, where Jesus said, "When you lift up the Son of Man, then you will know that I am He." You will know that I am who? That I am the Son of Man of Daniel 7, who comes with the clouds and is presented unto the Ancient of Days and is given this eternal dominion and kingdom and authority that everyone might serve Him. That's what Jesus was saying in that passage in John 8. That they will know that I am that Son of Man. Son of Man is a title of glory for the Son of God. In fact, there are several passages where the term Son of Man is used, and they directly reference Daniel chapter 7. Let's look at a few of those. Let's go to Matthew chapter 24. We're going to be studying Matthew 24 this morning in our Bible class, as well as on Wednesday night. In Matthew 24 and verse 30, Jesus said, "And then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky. And then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of the sky with power and great glory. Son of Man is the title of glory for the Son of God. Chapter 25 and verse 31. But when the Son of Man comes in His glory, and all the angels with Him, then He will sit on His glorious throne. Son of Man is a title of glory for the Son of God. He's going to sit on His throne. There's no throne described in Daniel 7 for Jesus, but there is a kingdom described being delivered, being given to Jesus. And if He has a kingdom, then that means He has a throne. Let's go now to Revelation chapter 1. Revelation, the first chapter. We're going to look in verses 13 and 14. This is in the description of the exalted, glorified Christ that John sees by way of vision. Verse 13, and in the middle of the lampstands I saw one like a son of man, clothed in a robe reaching to the feet and girded across his chest with a golden sash. His head and his hair were white, like white wool, like snow, and his eyes were like a flame of fire. You see in verse 13 the unmistakable connection with Daniel 7. And it's interesting that in verse 14, the description of Jesus with this white hair that's like wool, that's much like the description of the Ancient of Days in Daniel chapter 7. We see a merging of the description of Yahweh and of Jesus, His Son, because Jesus is divine just like Yahweh. Let's go to Revelation 14 and verse 14. Revelation 14 and verse 14. Then I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and sitting on the cloud was one like a son of man, having a golden crown on his head and a sharp sickle in his hand. This is a scene of judgment. This one sitting on the cloud, this Son of Man who has all this authority and all this power and all this glory, well, He's coming in judgment. Daniel 7 was a chapter of judgment. That's the context of judgment against those kingdoms, against those persecuting powers, particularly Rome. And really Daniel 7 and Revelation 13 are parallel chapters, because in Daniel 7, Daniel sees these four beasts come up out of the sea, the fourth one representing Rome. And here in Revelation 13, John sees a beast come up out of the sea, and it represents Rome as well. And in chapter 14, it is the Son of Man who comes in judgment of that beast. It's at the end of Revelation that we see Yahweh casting that beast into the lake that burns with fire and brimstone. Let's look at one more final passage, and that's in Matthew 26. Matthew chapter 26. Beginning in verse 57, Jesus is on trial before Caiaphas, the high priest. False witnesses are brought, bringing their false testimony. In verse 62, the high priest stood up and said to him, "Do you not answer? What is it that these men are testifying against you?" But Jesus kept silent. And the high priest said to him, "I adjure you by the living God, that you tell us whether you are the Christ, the Son of God." Jesus said to him, "You have said it yourself. Nevertheless, I tell you, hereafter you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven." He quotes Daniel 7, verse 13. Son of Man is a title of glory for the Son of God. The irony is, when Jesus was put on the cross, it appeared that He was defeated. But the opposite was true. That was the moment of greatest triumph. for the Son of Man. And as a result of what Jesus did on the cross, he received an eternal kingdom and dominion, which will never pass away, which will never be destroyed. And he will crush and put an end to every kingdom of man. And so this morning, as we take the Lord's Supper, let us glorify the Son of Man, Jesus Christ.